Hi, Trevor here, Life Reflection Requests. Welcome and thank you for stopping by. Well, the channel has received a request, and this came through the most unusual of ways. I was telling somebody how I was just about to start doing the Davids in my Life Reflections Through Music series, and they said, "What about King David?" Now, I thought to myself, right. Anyway, I started to get some ideas about where we could go with this particular video, and I'm going to need a couple of guys in here to help me get there. So I trust you will find all this an encouragement, which is the main thing. Well, so King David, he was a king in Israel around 1010 to 970 BCE. So we're talking a long, long time ago. He was the king of a united Israel back then. So David was he was the youngest of 8 brothers, and there are a couple of sisters in there as well. And David started out being the youngest of the brothers, looking after the sheep out in the paddocks. That's just what you did. Very lowly position. Nobody thought much about you, and he just did his thing. But he did it really, really well because he actually kept the sheep safe. Anyway, as it turns out, the king of Israel at the time, King Saul, he was struggling a little bit, and it was time to find another king. And so Samuel went to Jesse, who was David's dad, said, "Hey, I reckon the king is amongst your boys. Can you bring them all to me?" And one by one, they went from the oldest, and Samuel said, "None of these. Have you got anybody else?" And then Jesse thought, "Oh, there's actually David actually out in the field." So he brought him in, and sure enough, David was the one that was chosen. Now, interestingly, David was not chosen because of his strength or his good looks or everything. He was chosen because of his kindness and courage. Anyway, move forward a little bit more. So obviously that was a bit of a thing to start with. Then obviously we've got the famous David and Goliath story. This is where we had this big giant guy, and he was saying, "Who's going to fight me?" And nobody wanted to. Anyway, this little scrawny kid David says, "Hey, I'll give it a go." And sure enough, he goes out with his sling and stones and cracks Goliath on the head and brings him to the ground. Obviously, at that point, David's fame and notoriety rose. He became quite a prominent warrior, very successful out in the field, and was bringing success to Israel. Now, all amongst this time, King Saul was getting quite jealous, and he started to chase David around the countryside. Now, David would always escape, and David would also resist the opportunity to kill King Saul, because King Saul was the king. But eventually, after time, King Saul died. Then after a little bit of toing and froing, David eventually became king, taking his throne to Jerusalem for the first time. And during his reign that went for around 40 years, he was a very successful king, bringing the country together, political alliances, economic strength, strategic might, and military success. It's got to remember that Israel was surrounded by countries that just wanted to take them over. Israel had this beautiful coastline, and it was the land flowing with milk and honey, so a very tempting thing for countries around to take up. And so David was constantly having to protect his borders. Now, you'd think a king as successful as King David would just have it all together, but David, deep down, was very, very insecure and very, very unsure of himself, and he would be constantly battered to and fro by life in general. And in the Bible, there is a book called Psalms, and in the book of Psalms, there is about 150 of them, David wrote a large component of them. and this brought him peace and comfort during his time as king. And one of these psalms, really well known psalms, is "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures," and so it goes on and on and on. One of the most famous psalms in the Bible, and this is a psalm that you'll tend to hear at funerals, because it's just something that brings comfort to people and has done for millennium, that is for sure. Now, David died at the age of 70, so not that old. I think basically he just wore out, I'm thinking. But within that 70 years of life, he actually reigned for 40 years. So if you think about the fact that maybe at the age in the early 20s, he became king. Well, right, the real king, not the anointed, but actually sat on the throne. You know, that's most of his adult life. He was king, and he certainly did achieve a lot in his short 70 years of life. Now, as I said, King David wrote Psalm 23, and I need to bring another person into this story now to bring this psalm alive. Now we shoot forward from 970 BCE to 1953, Brooklyn in New York, and Keith Green, who was born. Now, he is an incredible vocalist with an incredible range. His piano playing verges on insanely ferocious at times, beautifully graceful at times. It's just one of the best, really, as far as his piano playing is concerned. He was also a prolific songwriter as well. And between 1977 and 1982, he released 5 albums. And then it was in around 1982-83 that Keith was involved in a plane crash, and he unfortunately left the world not very old at all, just barely, not even 30. So he was able to achieve such a lot in his short space of life. Now, the music industry really got behind Keith Green because of his absolutely insane talent that he had, and his albums are absolutely stunningly produced, and a lot of effort went into making these songs sound as good as they possibly could. Of course, when you got Keith Green singing with just his piano, sometimes you don't need anything else. That's all he needed. And he certainly had a message to the world, particularly to churches, that we need to take things a little bit more seriously. Now in 2001, so after his death, there's actually been another 18 album releases. I think the world realised what had actually happened in those 5 short years when he was producing albums. And they've sort of realised, man, there's a bit of a legacy here that we need to honour. And I know for me, my heart well and truly has a place for Keith Green, that is for sure. And in 2001, he was inducted into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame. So there we go, just so to show the respect that the music industry has for him. Now, back to King David in Psalm 23. The only way I could work out how to do a video on King David is to look at this Psalm 23. And it was Keith Green on his 1982 album Songs of the Shepherd, where he came out with his absolutely stunning rendition of Psalm 23. It is full of grace, quietness, and absolute power at times. When you put his voice in there and his piano playing in there, oh my goodness, it is spine-tingling, this stuff. You think about the fact that this guy's no longer around, that just even just adds more to the power of this song. Now, the production of this was so lavish. There's so many strings. There's so many things going on. This song's verging on progressive pop, progressive rock, progressive gospel. There's just that the record company just put everything they possibly could into this particular song. Now, there's no live version that I could find of The Lord is My Shepherd, and so what I've actually gone for is I've actually gone for a video clip series, and I suppose it's like the song with nice images behind it, which really just captures the song really, really well. So the link to that particular song is in the description below. Well, so for the person who wanted King David, I hope we've done it justice today. Not just a little bit about him, the incredible king that he was, but also the amazing Keith Green, who brought one of his classic song hymn Psalms to life, Psalm 23, with The Lord is My Shepherd. Well, if you've hung around to the end, this is your first time to Life Reflections Through Music, welcome to the channel. If you've come back, it's always good to see you guys coming back. And, you know, just goes to show we can do requests about anything. So get your thinking caps on and please challenge me in this area and we'll see where it goes. So anyway, next time when we do start the Davids in the Life Reflections Through Music series, I'll catch you around and I'll see you then. Bye for now.